It was supposed to be just an ordinary day, one of those simple days when life seems to follow its natural course, without any major surprises. My son called me early in the morning, with that hurried voice of someone trying to balance work, responsibilities, and adult life, which so often weighs more than we expect. "Mom, can you watch the kids today?" he asked, almost breathless. The sentence came with a mixture of tiredness and urgency, something that, as a mother, I recognize from afar. I didn't hesitate. I didn't need to think twice. I've always enjoyed spending time with my grandchildren. In fact, any opportunity to be near them feels like a small, unexpected gift from life. They bring light, they bring noise, they bring mess. But they also bring a kind of love that renews even the parts of me that time has insisted on wearing down. So, as I always do, I replied with that smile that, even though he couldn't see it, seemed to reach me through the phone line. "Of course, my son. Leave it to me." He let out a sigh, not just of relief, but of gratitude, and said, "Thank you, Mom. Really." It was in that really that something inside me ignited. Not distrust, not fear, just that gentle perception that perhaps he needed help much more than he let on. But as I've always done my whole life, I preferred to offer comfort first, question later. I got ready without rushing, putting on the knitted sweater that the children say smells like grandma. I grabbed my bag, a few things the kids like, cookies, a coloring book, markers, and set off towards my son's house. The day was calm, the sky partly cloudy, but with no sign of rain. On the way, I remembered when he was little, running around the house, asking for help with his homework or inventing stories to justify his mischief. It's funny how, even after so many years, I still see in him that same boy who needed me for everything, and now, as an adult, he still needs me, just in a different way. When I arrived, he opened the door quickly, as if he had been waiting for me leaning against it. His face looked more tired than usual. He hugged me tightly, tighter than usual, and I felt in that tight embrace that something there wasn't entirely at peace. But again, I decided not to ask anything. Sometimes, silence is the gentlest embrace we can give. The children came running to me, laughing, clinging to my legs as they always do. That spontaneous affection warmed my heart. Nothing in the world compares to the sincere smile of a grandchild calling you by name. I picked them both up, kissed their little foreheads, and said, "Let's have a great time today, you little rascals." They laughed and ran off, making that delightful childhood sound that fills any home with life. My son thanked me again, too quickly, like someone who didn't want to have a long conversation. He grabbed his wallet and keys, straightened his shirt, and said he wasn't sure what time he'd be back. I told him not to worry, that everything would be fine. He nodded, but didn't look me in the eye. He left, almost stumbling in his haste. And it was at that moment, as soon as the door closed behind him, that I felt a strange sensation. Not something threatening, but a kind of discreet intuition, the kind only mothers can identify. The house seemed different. Not exactly messy, nor too quiet. Just different. But I pushed the feeling aside. After all, my role there was simple: to take care of the children, play with them, make dinner, and ensure that all the little routines were followed. While preparing a snack, I looked around and tried to understand what was so subtly out of place. Perhaps it was just my imagination. Perhaps it was just nostalgia for when my house was full of that kind of childlike energy. I didn't want to feed uncomfortable thoughts. I preferred to focus on the moment. My grandchildren were happy with me, and that was enough for me. We sat together to play, draw, and invent stories. Time seemed to flow, smoothly, like when life is peaceful. But even so, there was something in the air, a slight weight, as if the house carried a secret breathing through its walls. And unknowingly, that would only be the beginning of a revelation that would change everything. The way I saw my son, how I understood my family, and even how I saw myself. But at that moment, I didn't know any of that. For me, it was still just a simple day. A day of grandma taking care of her grandchildren. An ordinary day. A safe day. The kind of day you live without suspecting that destiny is about to open a door that can never be closed again. As soon as my son left and silence filled the house, that feeling that had touched me at the entrance returned. Only this time, clearer, more insistent, as if an invisible thread were pulling my attention to the small details that would normally go unnoticed. It was as if everything was almost normal, and the almost was precisely what made me uneasy. The house always had a certain order. My son, despite the daily rush, you've always been organized. Not the type obsessed with cleanliness, but someone who likes to keep everything in its place, mainly because of the children. That's why it was strange to notice toys hastily piled up in a corner of the living room, not scattered but stacked, as if someone had tried to clean everything too quickly, without bothering to be careful. Dolls facing the wall, toy cars boxed upside down, a children's book open upside down on the sofa. It wasn't a child's mess. It was tidying up done by an adult, but done in a hurry. As I moved through the house, observing the small clues the environment unintentionally left behind, something else caught my attention: the smell. It wasn't strong nor unpleasant, but it was there, a mixture of damp wood, old dust, and something I couldn't identify. A slightly metallic smell, perhaps? Or chemical? It wasn't a common odor in his house. In fact, I never remembered smelling it there before. It was subtle, but constant, as if it came from some specific corner. The children were playing, oblivious to my apprehension, running between the living room and the hallway, laughing loudly. This normalcy comforted me somewhat, but it didn't erase the persistent feeling that something was out of sync in that house. I ran my hand over the surface of the table and noticed a thin layer of dust in some spots. Something rare, since my son usually cleaned everything on weekends. It wasn't dust that had accumulated for a long time, but it seemed recent, as if something had been moved or disturbed recently in the room. That's when my eyes landed on the hallway. The basement door was there, locked as always, but there was something about it that hadn't been there before. A new padlock, shiny, heavy, almost mirror-like in color, freshly purchased. My heart beat a little faster. The basement never had a padlock. It never needed one. It was just a common space in the house, with boxes of souvenirs, tools, old toys, that kind of clutter that families keep for when they need it. So why lock the basement now? I tried to ignore the wave of questions that began to form, but it was impossible not to feel the impact of that sudden change. I walked slowly to the door, almost without realizing I was holding my breath. I touched the padlock with my fingertips. It was icy, completely cold, as if it had been put on just a short time ago. The wood of the door, however, also had something different about it. It seemed to have been pushed forcefully at some point. There was a slight mark on the jamb, as if the latch had been repeatedly pressed. The children called me from the living room and I jumped slightly, as if I'd been caught red-handed doing something wrong. I took a deep breath, tried to relax my shoulders, and turned to answer. But still, something inside me kept demanding attention, as if the house was trying to tell me a story I didn't yet have the courage to hear. I went back into the living room, trying to act naturally. I sat on the carpet and started playing with the little ones, but my eyes kept wandering around the house, taking in details that didn't seem to fit. A back window slightly open despite the cold wind outside, a towel lying near the kitchen door, a coat tossed over a chair, not hanging, but abandoned, and the smell seemed stronger near the hallway, as if it were coming directly from the direction of the basement. I tried to strike up a conversation with the children casually, without showing concern. I asked about their day, about school, about the cartoons they had been watching recently. At a certain point, I blurted out the question that had been on my mind. Have you guys been playing around in the basement a lot? The answer came quickly, naturally, spontaneously. No, Grandma. Dad said we can't go there now. My heart ached. Why? I asked, trying to keep my voice light, almost sing-song. I don't know. He said he's sorting some things out there. Tidying up? New padlock? Strange smell? Are objects out of place? Fresh dust? The pieces didn't form a complete puzzle, but they did form a shadow of something bigger. Worry began to take shape within me, gently but growing. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was suspicion. It was intuition. It was that feeling that mothers know so well, the feeling that warns before any concrete proof. Something isn't right here. At the same time, I didn't want to judge my son. He had always been responsible, present, and affectionate with the children. A hard-working, dedicated man, sometimes even too much so. Perhaps he was going through some difficulty at work or in his personal life. Perhaps he was trying to deal with something alone, without wanting to worry me. Perhaps it was just something too simple to justify all this anxiety that was beginning to form inside me. But what if it wasn't? As the hours passed, the house seemed to breathe with me, and with each breath, something inside me contracted, as if preparing me for something I couldn't yet name. The padlock was still there, gleaming in the hallway like a small, silent warning. And the smell, that strange, persistent smell, began to become impossible to ignore. I tried to follow the natural flow of the afternoon. I made snacks for the children, put on music, opened the windows to air it out. But none of these actions managed to dispel the latent feeling that there was an invisible presence inside the house. Not a person, but a secret big enough to alter the very energy of the environment. And it was in this light, yet unsettling atmosphere that I realized this was no longer an ordinary day. Something hidden, something silent, something alive was waiting. And at some point that night, I would find it. Children always have a curious way of saying things. Sometimes they speak truths as big as mountains with the naturalness of someone commenting on the taste of a cookie. Other times they utter phrases that, to them, mean nothing. But to us adults, they are like little flashlights pointing to something in the dark. And that afternoon, surrounded by their laughter and the invisible weight of the house, I was about to hear one of those phrases, one that would completely change the course of that day. We were sitting on the living room floor, scattering building blocks everywhere. They were trying to build a tall tower, while I focused more on their behavior than on, their games. It was as if I was unconsciously searching for clues in small actions, in stray words, in habits. The strange atmosphere of the house wouldn't let me relax. The new padlock on the basement kept nagging at my mind, as did the smell that stubbornly refused to go away. It was then, in the middle of an innocent conversation about cartoons, broken toys, and art class at school, that my granddaughter blurted out, "Grandma, did you know that Dad yelled at Theo because he went down to the basement?" My body went cold, not from fear, but from the impact of the phrase. It was as if someone had turned on a light at the very end of a dark hallway. I tried to act naturally, but my voice came out a little lower than I wanted. Really? And why did Dad fight with him? My grandson, distracted while fitting two pieces together, replied with the lightheartedness of someone talking about the weather, because Dad said that nobody can go in there now, that it's forbidden, that it's dangerous. The word kept echoing in my head, dangerous. I tried to smile so as not to alarm them, but my heart gave a firm leap in my chest. Dangerous why? I asked, still trying to maintain a playful tone. They exchanged glances, those quick glances children give when they remember a secret kept from them by adults. My granddaughter was the first to speak. That's all he said, that we can't, that if we go in, he'll get very angry. Very angry. Very angry with children for going into a basement? Something didn't fit. It was common for my son to protect his children from electrical outlets, ladders, chemicals, but I never saw him overreact. I never saw him react with disproportionate irritation. He was always patient, balanced, the kind of father who explains things, not the kind who forbids without dialogue. This abrupt change sounded strange. It sounded wrong. My granddaughter then added, tucking her hair behind her ear, as she does when she's telling someone something important. The other day, I heard a noise downstairs. Dad was talking to someone, but we can't go down to see. Are you talking to someone? My breath caught in my throat for a few seconds. I felt the world around me slowing down, as if everything was about to rearrange itself in a direction I didn't want to face. With someone? Who was there? I asked, trying not to sound anxious. I don't know, she shrugged. Dad said it was just his thing. That's his thing. The basement locked. The new padlock. The strange smell. The different behavior. The tidying up was done in a hurry. And now, noises, conversations, prohibitions. My heart began to piece together all the elements like loose parts of a puzzle I never knew existed. I, who always thought I knew every inch of my son's life, was realizing that there were parts of him that had become inaccessible, hidden behind a locked door, literally. The children continued playing, as if they hadn't just added fuel to a fire I was trying to keep out. For them, it was all just part of everyday life. But for me, it was a silent warning. I decided to change the subject momentarily, so as not to seem intrusive. And you? Are you afraid of the basement? The little boy looked up at me with his big round eyes and replied, a little. Because it's noisy, and because Dad never let me lock it. Now he always locks it. Always lock it. The basement had never been locked before. Never. Not when my son was a teenager. Not when he became an adult. Not even when the house was full of junk. Why now? A chill ran down my spine. It wasn't fear of something supernatural or imaginary. It was the rational, logical kind of chill. The kind that arises when something that should be obvious ceases to make sense. I knew my son. I knew his quirks, his habits, his weaknesses, and nothing about that behavior matched him. It was as if he were hiding something he didn't want anyone, especially his children, to find out, while helping the children pick up the scattered pieces. My thoughts raced in disarray. I tried to find logical explanations. Perhaps he was doing some renovations. Perhaps he was keeping something valuable and wanted to protect it. Perhaps it was something related to work. But all of these hypotheses had holes. Big holes. And then came the inevitable question, the one that began to loom large in my mind like a shadow. What exactly could my son be hiding in the basement? The unease now had roots. It was no longer just a vague discomfort. It was a mystery taking shape. And mysteries, when they involve people we love, are even more unsettling. The children's laughter filled the room, but inside me, a heavy silence began to grow. A silence full of questions, full of suspicions, full of a truth that I knew sooner or later I would have to face. And as I looked down the hallway, at the locked door that seemed to watch over every corner of the house, I was certain of one thing. This was no mere detail. It was an invitation or a warning. Something was down there, something important, something my son didn't want anyone to know. And in that instant, without realizing it, I took the first step towards a secret that would change everything. The afternoon slipped away slowly, as if the clock were testing my patience. Games, snacks, cartoons on television, innocent questions. On the outside, everything seemed like the usual routine of a house with children, but inside, I felt like I was walking on a floor that could crack at any moment. Every laugh from my grandchildren was a relief, and every silence in the house was a reminder that something was out of place. As the sky began to darken outside the living room window, I felt a tightness in my chest that I couldn't explain. Night has always had a different weight to it since I got older. The darkness seems to amplify thoughts, lengthen shadows, give voice to things that, during the day, we managed to silence. In that house, in that situation, all of that was multiplied. I prepared a simple dinner for the children. Nothing fancy. Rice, shredded chicken, a little salad. They ate between conversations, talking about school, friends, and a cartoon they wanted to watch with their father on the weekend. At no point did they seem scared or bothered, and that, in a way, made me even more uneasy. Because if they thought everything was normal, maybe the problem wasn't in the house. Maybe the problem was with me. Or maybe my heart was trying to warn me of something that reason couldn't yet grasp. After their bath, I dressed them in their pajamas, and I heard the same old excuses to try and sleep in, the same pleas. Just one more story, Grandma. I sat on the edge of the bed, between the two of them, and told a quiet story, one of those about courage, family, and protection. As I spoke, I felt the weight of my own words. On some level, I was also trying to calm myself down. When they finally fell asleep, the house changed. The silence that had previously been punctuated by laughter and small footsteps now became dense, heavy, almost physical. I closed the bedroom door slowly, careful not to make a sound, and stood still in the hallway for a few seconds, just listening. The children's breathing didn't reach me. What did reach me was something else. The distant sound of the house breathing, and an echo that I still couldn't name. I went back into the living room, turned off most of the lights, and left only a lamp on, creating a soft circle of light around me. I sat on the sofa intending to watch some television, to pass the time until my son returned. But, no matter how hard I tried to pay attention, the images on the screen became just moving colors. My mind was elsewhere, more precisely, in the hallway, and at the basement door. That's when I heard it. A dry sound. Low, but clear enough to make me look up immediately. It came from below. It came from the floor. It came from where no one should be. The basement. At first, I tried to rationalize. It must have just been the house working, wood creaking, something old. Perhaps it was some poorly fitted object that fell. I pressed my lips together, took a deep breath, and looked back at the television. But inside, something stirred. An ancient, almost maternal instinct, which has nothing to do with caring for children, but for oneself. That inner voice that says, "Pay attention. This isn't normal." A few minutes later, the sound came again. Now it was different. A light dragging sound, as if something were being pulled slowly across the ground. It wasn't loud, it wasn't scandalous, but it had a strange, unsettling weight. It wasn't the sound of pipes, or wind, or wood simply giving way. It was the sound of movement, of something, or someone. My heart raced. I felt the blood pounding in my ears, as if the surrounding silence had amplified everything inside me. I looked down the hallway, as if I could see through the floor, through the door, through the padlock. Everything was quiet, too quiet. I got up from the sofa slowly, almost without realizing it. I took a few steps towards the hallway, but stopped halfway. The house was rather dark, the lamp giving the room that yellowish, nostalgic tone, while the hallway seemed like a darker, colder tunnel. I stood there, still, listening. No sound for a few seconds. And then, another noise. This time it's clear. One dry touch it was as if a box had been placed or dropped on the floor. Somewhere down there. Not loud enough to wake the children, but loud enough for me to be sure. It wasn't my imagination. My first impulse was to think about calling him. Picking up the phone, calling my son, and asking, point blank, "Is anyone down there? Are you hiding something in the basement?" But at the same time, something held me back. Part of me didn't want to hear the answer. Another part was still trying to defend my son in my mind. He wouldn't do anything wrong. He must have a reason. You're exaggerating. And, like many mothers do, I tried to push the uncomfortable reality aside, wrap it in a blanket, and pretend everything was fine. I went back to the sofa, sat down, but this time I didn't turn on the television. I just held the remote in my hands, staring at the blank screen that reflected, in blurry lines, my own tense face. I listened a little more. Nothing. Silence. Again. That's when another noise came. Short. Almost a snap. As if something had been pushed against the wall or dragged a few centimeters. And then, nothing. Fear began to take on a more concrete form within me. It wasn't that desperate fear of someone running out the door. It was another kind of fear. The fear that makes us freeze, trying to understand if the danger is real or if it's all in our heads. A fear that weighs more on the conscience than on the legs. I got up again, now a little more determined. I went to the hallway, stopped in front of the children's bedroom door, pressed my ear against it, and listened to their calm, peaceful breathing. They were fast asleep. Knowing they were all right gave me a little courage, but it also increased my sense of responsibility. I couldn't simply ignore what was happening. If something was wrong, I needed to be alert. I was the responsible adult in that house. I took a few more steps. The hallway seemed longer than it had been in the afternoon. With each step, the floor felt a little heavier. The dim light from the lamp didn't reach the end, so the section where the basement door was located was darker, enveloped in a twilight that made everything feel even more oppressive. I could make out the outline of the door. The padlock was still there, silent, motionless, gleaming faintly when a beam of light escaped from the room. I moved closer just enough to see better. The strange smell seemed a little stronger in that section of the hallway. It wasn't my imagination. It was there, mixed with the air, ancient, trapped. For a second, the idea of grabbing the padlock and trying to force it open somehow crossed my mind. I could justify it to my son later. I could say I heard noises and got worried. But I knew that if I crossed that line, there would be no going back. Opening that door would be opening a part of his life that he clearly didn't want to show anyone. Not now, I whispered to myself, as if I were giving an order to my own heart. I took a few steps back, but before leaving the hallway completely, I heard one last sound. Very faint, almost like a muffled sigh coming from downstairs. Or maybe it was just my mind filling the void. I don't know. But at that moment, the unease was no longer a passing visit. It had settled within me. I went back to the living room, but this time I didn't sit down. I paced in circles, looking at the clock on the wall, watching the second hand dragging along as if mocking my anxiety. Each minute seemed longer than the last. The house was silent. The basement was too quiet. I started talking quietly to myself, trying to organize my thoughts. You're here to take care of the children. They're fine. The rest, you can deal with later. But it was no use. With every step I took through the house, I had the feeling that something down there was also moving, waiting, breathing. The night continued to advance, heavy, slow, and with it, fear ceased to be just a vague feeling and transformed into a constant presence. I still didn't know what my son was hiding in the basement. But one thing was certain. It wasn't just a detail of the house. It was a secret, a living secret, and I was getting closer and closer to discovering it, whether I wanted to or not. The clock kept ticking, each second marking more intensely in the silence of the house than necessary. The yellowish light of the lamp seemed to dim with the passing hours, as if it too felt the weight of that strange night. I paced back and forth, trying to swallow the unease growing inside me, but it was like trying to hold water between my fingers. The more I tried to ignore it, the more it escaped and seeped into every corner of my thoughts. I sat on the sofa, crossed my hands in my lap, and took a deep breath, as if that simple gesture could reorganize the chaos within me. I've always been a practical woman, one of those who get things done, who aren't easily shaken, who believe in goodness before suspecting it. My son, since he was little, has always had my vote of confidence. I watched him grow, stumble, and get back up. I knew his heart, or at least I thought I did. But that night, there was something new between us. A shadow that hadn't existed before. A secret. A distance I couldn't explain. The house seemed to be watching me. Every wall, every piece of furniture, every small imperfection seemed to carry a silent warning. The weight was there, between the hallway and the living room, between the clock and the padlock, between my head and my heart. And no matter how hard I tried to escape it, I knew I was being pushed further and further towards the same point, the basement. I closed my eyes for a moment, and, in that brief moment, the question I had been trying to avoid echoed within me. What is my son hiding? This question shouldn't exist. Not for a mother. Not for someone who has dedicated her entire life to raising, educating, and protecting. The mere idea of distrusting him hurt me in a way I didn't expect. It was as if he were betraying our history. But intuition persisted. And a mother's intuition is one of the oldest and most powerful forces in the world. Something inside me began to throb more strongly. A mixture of fear, responsibility, and above all, love. Because it was precisely love that made me realize something was wrong. Love isn't about closing your eyes. It's not about silencing what your heart is screaming. True love, that deep love, the love that time cannot destroy, is precisely the opposite. It's about facing it, even when it hurts. It's about seeing, even when we prefer not to see. I stood up with difficulty, as if my own body were fighting against the decision. I looked towards the basement door and felt my whole body shudder. That hallway seemed darker than it had been a few minutes ago, narrower, denser. I took a few steps but stopped halfway. My hand trembled slightly, not from panic, but from hesitation, because it wasn't just the basement I was about to face. It was the possibility of discovering something about my son that I didn't want to find out. The internal conflict was so strong that I felt like sitting down again, waiting, pretending nothing was happening, telling myself I was exaggerating, that the whole feeling was just a figment of my imagination. The silent night, the strange smell that might be coming from some kind of leak. I almost convinced myself of that. Almost. But then I remembered the noise. From the drag, the box falling, from the conversation the children overheard, about the new padlock. The fear in their eyes as they said, "Dad said it's forbidden." And right there, at that exact moment, something inside me flipped a switch. I could bear to doubt myself, but I couldn't bear the idea that my grandchildren were in any kind of danger, however small. Motherhood never fades, it just changes form. And when you become a grandmother, it seems that love becomes even more attentive, stronger, more sensitive to the signs. "I need to see what's down there," I murmured, and my own voice echoed down the hallway as if someone else had spoken. It was strange to hear my thoughts transformed into sound. It was almost as if I were giving myself an order. I approached slowly. The hallway seemed to stretch out as I walked, as if trying to push me away from my destiny. The clock showed almost 10 p.m. My son still hadn't returned. The silence of the house seemed so solid I could touch it. I stopped in front of the basement door. I smelled the strange scent even stronger. There, the padlock gleamed in the dim light, like a cold, watchful eye. I touched it again, as I had done earlier. It was still cold, too cold. And this time, there was a different feeling when I touched it. A feeling that this small, metallic object was the only barrier between me and a truth that could hurt. My hand remained there for a few seconds. The coldness of the metal crept up my skin, and I felt an internal struggle that seemed to split my chest in two. The part that wanted to protect my son and the part that wanted to protect my grandchildren. The part that wanted to respect his privacy, and the part that wanted to ensure he wasn't getting into something dangerous without help. Love is full of contradictions. And that night, I felt them all. I stood there, motionless, for long seconds, long enough to think about giving up, long enough to imagine my son walking through the door and finding me invading his space, long enough to feel guilty just for considering it, because it wasn't just a locked door. It was his life. It was whatever he was hiding. It was whatever he was afraid to show us. But then I heard another noise, much softer than the previous ones. A muffled whisper? A sigh? A light tap on some box? I couldn't tell. I only knew it was coming from there. And in that instant, all the conflict disappeared. Suddenly, there was no more doubt, no more hesitation, No more room for silent fear. There was only one absolute certainty that took shape within me like fire. I needed to know what was down there, because something wasn't right in that house, because my son was hiding something too big, and because if I didn't find out that night, it might be too late. I took a deep breath, stepped back to reorganize my thoughts, and felt my heart pounding so hard, it felt like it was trying to burst out of my chest. I still didn't know how I would open that door, or what I would find there, but I knew, with the strength of all mothers who have faced the impossible, that I could no longer ignore it. Between trust and instinct, between love and fear, between respect and responsibility, instinct won out. And there, standing before that locked door, I understood that sometimes loving someone means doing precisely what they would never want you to do. I stood there for a few seconds in front of the basement door, listening to my own heart pounding, too loud for such a small body. The house was in an almost aggressive silence, the kind that makes any tiny sound seem like a thunderclap. The clock in the living room continued its relentless ticking, marking the time as if hoping I would give up. But it was too late. I had crossed the invisible line between doubt and decision. Now all that remained was to go all the way. I glanced down the hallway, making sure the children's bedroom door was still closed. A quick thought crossed my mind. What if they wake up? The answer came soon after. If something wrong was happening in that house, the worst thing would be to remain ignorant. One way or another, I needed to ensure that environment was safe for them. And deep down, I knew that no grandmother would sleep peacefully knowing that, just a few meters from where her grandchildren rest, there is a locked basement from which strange noises are coming. I moved closer to the door. The different smells seemed to condense there, a mixture of old wood, dampness, and something else, something I couldn't yet identify, but which made the air heavier. The padlock gleamed, cold and firm. For some reason, I expected it to miraculously be open now, as a sign. But no, it was still closed, fitted into the metal latch, as if it were fulfilling a mission. I ran my fingers along the wooden door, feeling the marks of use, the irregularities, the slightly rough texture. That door wasn't new, but the padlock was. This combination bothered me. An old part of the house was being kept under control by something recent, imposed, foreign to that place. On impulse, I gripped the padlock tighter and tried to turn it, as if by a stroke of luck it would give way. It didn't. Frustration came along with a pang of fear. I knew that if I really wanted to go down there, I would need to overcome not only my hesitation, but a physical barrier. I looked around, searching for something that could help me. In the corner of the hallway, leaning against the wall, there was a small wooden stool, one of those used to reach things high up, a little. Further on, already in the kitchen, I saw one of the cabinets ajar, and, inside, the tip of a hammer. My heart raced at this sight. I didn't intend to destroy anything of my son's, but, at the same time, a harsh certainty grew inside me. There were things more important than an intact padlock. I walked to the kitchen, picked up the hammer with slightly trembling hands, and for a moment felt the cold weight of the metal. I slowly returned to the hallway, where the basement door awaited, silent. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at that piece of iron that now represented the boundary between me and the truth. "Forgive me, my son," I thought, without the courage to say it aloud, and then I raised my arm. The first blow wasn't so strong, maybe out of fear, maybe out of guilt. The sound, however, echoed through the house as if I had knocked down an entire wall. A metallic crash mixed with the impact of the wood. My heart raced. I waited for some movement, some noise coming from the children's room, any sign that I had woken them. Nothing. Everything remained quiet. I took a deep breath and delivered the second blow. This time, firmer. The padlock swayed, the latch creaking in protest. Another blow, and another, until I heard the dry, definitive sound of the metal giving way. A piece of the padlock broke off, and it hung halfway, unusable. The latch, now without the lock, came loose. For a moment, everything stopped. Me, the house, time. I carefully placed my hand on the doorknob, almost expecting it to be hot, like in fire scenes. But it was just cold, exactly like the rest of the structure. I turned it slowly. The door gave way with a low, dragging creak, as if it were complaining about being woken up after being closed for a long time. When the opening was wide enough, a breath of cooler air rose from the darkness of the basement, hitting my face. It was as if that space breathed a different air from the rest of the house. The dim light from the hallway tried to penetrate but was lost a few steps ahead, swallowed by the twilight. I reached for the light switch on the side of the wall, fumbling with unsteady fingers. For a moment, I feared the light wouldn't work, that I would have to face that abyss with nothing but courage. But when I pressed the button, a dim light below came on. It wasn't a bright, clear light. It was yellowish, flickering, with that feeling of an old bulb about to burn out. Still, it was enough to reveal the beginning of the staircase. The basement staircase had always been old, narrow, slightly crooked wooden planks, the kind of staircase that complains with every step, as if it had a mind to think of. This time, however, it seemed more menacing than ever. The wooden handrail showed signs of wear, smooth in some places, rough in others. The distant sound, almost like an echo of my own fear, seemed to rise from below. I took the first step. The wood creaked under my weight, a sharp sound, almost a wail. I stopped. I gripped the handrail tighter, feeling the roughness beneath my fingers. I looked up toward the hallway and for a moment considered turning back. I still could. I could go back upstairs, lock it again, pretend the padlock had never been broken, wait for my son to arrive and simply say it was just another night. I could cling to the illusion and keep believing that some things are better when they remain unknown. But then I remembered the children's gaze. I remembered the phrase, "Daddy said it's, forbidden." I remembered the sounds. I remembered the smell. I remembered the weight of that house that night. And then I went down another step. Each step seemed to echo not only in the basement, but inside me. The sensation was of descending into a secret. The dim light down there created exaggerated shadows on the walls, strange outlines that seemed to move when I blinked. The air was colder, denser, almost damp. My nostrils stung slightly as they adjusted to the stronger smell down there. A mixture of old wood, accumulated dust, perhaps some chemical. That metallic, almost bittersweet aroma was still present. The noise I had heard before was gone. Now it was just the sound of the stairs beneath me, the rustling of my clothes, my own quickened breathing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't completely alone. Not in a physical sense, but emotionally. As if the basement itself held a gaze upon me. When I reached the last step, I stopped, without immediately stepping onto the cement floor. From where I was, I could already see part of the room. Stacked boxes, some open, others sealed with tape, shelves with old items, an old fan standing in a corner, a blanket thrown over a chair. All of this irregularly illuminated by the lamp hanging from the ceiling, which insisted on trembling slightly, increasing the atmosphere of uncertainty. I finally descended the last step and felt the cold floor beneath my feet. The sensation was different, as if that floor still held stories no one told. I took a few steps, scanning the space with my gaze, but still without getting too close to anything. The sound of my own footsteps echoed in small waves, making the basement seem larger than it actually was. That's when I realized something that made me stop. One of the interior doors, which I didn't even remember existed before, perhaps some kind of partition within the basement itself, was ajar, not very wide, just enough to let through an even darker slice of shadow, as if, even within the dim light, that specific space managed to be even more hidden. My heart raced again. The ceiling light illuminated the main space, but didn't reach the interior of that enclosed area very well. No sound came from the crack, but I had the strange feeling that if I got closer, I would hear something. Or maybe it was just my mind filling in the gaps. I slowly approached the half-open door. The silence there was thicker, almost solid. The smell also seemed to concentrate more in that direction. It wasn't unbearable, but bothersome enough that I breathed a little more shallowly. My hand, which had already trembled on the padlock, trembled again as it touched the side of the door. It was cold, as if that part of the basement hadn't received any warmth in a long time. I pushed just a little, hearing the long creak of the hinges protesting the movement. The feeling was that I was violating not only a physical space, but a moral boundary. The door, now slightly more open, revealed an interior still shrouded in shadows, with undefined shapes. It was as if I were on the verge of a secret about to leap out at me. My heart was pounding so hard I could swear the very wood of the door was vibrating along with it. And it was there, with one foot on the basement floor and the other almost inside that dark void, that I realized there was no turning back. I had broken the padlock, gone down the stairs, crossed the silence, faced the fear. Whatever was there, any truth, any lie, any horror, was now part of my path. All that remained was to take the next step. I stood there before that inner door, a crack open between me and something I still couldn't comprehend. The dim ceiling light cast a shadow on the wall, creating the sensation that the basement itself breathed silently while awaiting my next move. I could hear my own accelerated breathing, my heart pounding as if it wanted to announce to the whole world that I was afraid, but also possessed a determination I never imagined I had at that age. I moved my face a little closer to the opening, trying to get a better look at what was inside. It took my eyes a few seconds to adjust to the thick, almost solid darkness that seemed to cover that small space like a cloak. The main light in the basement didn't reach that part. It felt like that room existed apart from the rest of the house, hidden even from the light itself. With my hand still on the door, I pushed it a little further. The hinges protested, with a long, harsh creak echoing off the walls, a sound so loud in that silence that I felt as if I had screamed. The noise made me take a small step back, more out of reflex than real fear. But I knew I couldn't stop now, not after breaking the padlock, not after going down the stairs, not after ignoring hours of intuition. I pushed a little more. This time, the door gave way completely, opening slowly until it touched the wall. The darkness of the room seemed to swallow me for a few seconds, until I could make out shapes, undefined silhouettes in the corner, stacked volumes, objects thrown in a seemingly random way. But there was something else, something that immediately caught my eye, holding me as if by a magnet. It was a soft, almost imperceptible glow at the back of the room. It wasn't a reflection from the metal of the lamp. It was different. A kind of glow that seemed to come from a smooth surface, perhaps foil or glass, reflecting the little light that managed to penetrate that space. I took 2 steps inside, slowly, like someone treading on forbidden territory. As my eyes adjusted, the shadows began to form sharper outlines. I noticed a low, makeshift table with objects scattered on it. There were open boxes on the floor, some containing yellowed papers, others notebooks, folders, and envelopes. And then, as I moved a little closer, the vision became clear enough to chill my blood. I stopped. My whole body stopped. I couldn't breathe, because there, right in front of me, was something that simply, it shouldn't be there. That was no ordinary mess. It wasn't simply a storage facility. It wasn't just a collection of old things. Deliberate, organized, protected, escondido. It was as if that space had been created by someone who wanted to preserve something with extreme care, but at the same time, with extreme secrecy. It wasn't an ordinary basement. It was a preservation room, a room of memory, of obsessive care, or despair. My hands began to tremble as I approached the table. The dim light illuminated only part of it, but it was enough to see that on top there were objects I recognized, and others I had never seen before. I moved a little closer, tilting my head to try to understand exactly what was in front of me. And then came the strange feeling, that mixture of recognition and shock, like when you see a dream take shape. My heart pounded so hard I had to put my hand on the table to keep my balance, because there, scattered, were fragments of a story that belonged to our family, a story that I believed was completely buried, a story that, until then, I thought only I knew, or that perhaps only I was trying to forget. The documents are too old to be there, photos that I never imagined still existed, envelopes worn by time, bearing names I hadn't heard in decades, boxes containing personal belongings that I was certain had been lost or destroyed, and at the center of it all, as if it were the main piece of the puzzle, there was something even more disturbing, something that made my legs weak, something that made my eyes burn as if I had forgotten how to blink. I felt transported back in time, for a part of my life that I never told my son about, for a chapter that I thought he could never discover, and the question came like a silent shot. How did he manage that? When did he find out? Why was he keeping everything a secret? My whole body shivered. I didn't know if I felt fear, guilt, pain, anger, or relief. It was all at once, as if that entire room were a Pandora's box opened in front of me, releasing memories, truths, risks, guilt, and dormant secrets. I touched one of the objects with my fingertips and pulled slowly. The paper was old, rough, with that fragile texture that seems like it could tear at the slightest movement. Next to it were photos, and in those photos, faces I recognized, which made my throat tighten. I took a step back. The air had become too heavy to breathe. I turned, looking around, trying to grasp the scale of it all. There were folders, stacks of documents, recent notes, handwritten, in my son's handwriting. He was researching, investigating, putting pieces together, connecting dots that, until then, only existed within me. And then the final realization hit me like a stone. My son wasn't hiding something trivial. I wasn't working on a typical project. I wasn't just preserving old memories. He was protecting a secret so deep that it could change. Everything about who I believed myself to be, about who he believed himself to be, about who we were as a family. That room was a living archive, a secret sanctuary, a silent scream, a revelation about to explode. And there, faced with a discovery that no one could ever have expected, I understood that nothing, absolutely nothing, would be the same after that night. Because what I found in the basement wasn't just a memory, it was true. And truths, when hidden for too long, return with enough. Forced to destroy, or liberate, anyone who touches them. I stood there in the middle of that small room, feeling as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. It wasn't just the cold of the basement, nor the heavy smell, nor the dim light. It was something else. It was as if time had suddenly collapsed upon me, as if all the years I had tried to move on, forgetting certain parts of my history, had suddenly risen up and surrounded me on all sides. I looked again at the table, at the boxes, at the documents, at everything that shouldn't be there. Not like that, not in my son's hands. It was as if someone had invaded a secret room inside me and scattered everything in the middle of a room, illuminated, wide open, without asking permission, except that this person wasn't a stranger. It was my own son. My legs felt weak. I gripped the side of the table to keep from falling. In my chest, a brutal mix of emotions began to clash, without order, without logic: fear, confusion, anger, guilt, sadness, a kind of hurt I couldn't even name. My eyes began to burn, but I still tried to hold back, as if crying were a way of admitting that I was facing something definitive, something that couldn't be erased. For a moment, I wanted to deny it. I wanted to tell myself that I was misinterpreting things, that those papers, those photos, those notes of my son didn't mean what I thought. I wanted to believe it was all a coincidence, that he was just curious, that it was just unimportant research. But I knew it wasn't. Every choice, every detail, everything kept there had an intention. It wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, careful, planned. And it hurt. It hurt as if someone had reached inside my chest and squeezed a place I hadn't let anyone touch in years, a place I myself had avoided looking at. "Why?" I whispered without finishing the sentence. My voice sounded strange, hoarse, as if it were coming from very far away. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, trying to breathe. Slowly, but the air felt too heavy. Memories began to surge, one after another, as if some dam had broken inside. Old faces, difficult decisions, conversations I never had the courage to have, things I needed to do and things I chose to hide. I thought I was protecting my son by remaining silent. I thought the best thing I could do was give him a clean life, without the stains of my past, without unnecessary burdens. And now, he was there, in the darkness of a basement, immersed in exactly what I had spent my whole life trying to protect myself from. I felt such a strong pang of guilt that I needed to sit down. I carefully dragged one of the chairs and sat right there, in the middle of that sanctuary of secrets. I rested my elbows on my knees and my face in my hands. Tears began to flow, silently, without fanfare, just falling, as if my body had finally understood that it could no longer hold back so much. A question began swirling in my mind, insistent, cruel, merciless. Why is my own son hiding this from me? I knew the answer wasn't simple. It wasn't just a matter of because he wanted to. There were layers to it, layers of silence, of fear, of distrust, of unspoken things. Perhaps on some level, I myself had contributed to it. Perhaps without realizing it, I had shown him that certain subjects were forbidden. Perhaps he had learned by observing my reactions that there were parts of our history that I wasn't ready to revisit. And yet, it hurt. It hurt to imagine him carrying all of that alone in the dark without seeking me out. A part of me felt betrayed, not betrayed by him discovering it, but by him not coming to me, eye to eye, and asking, "Mom, what happened?" Instead, he searched alone. He rummaged through it. He pieced it all together. He descended into the depths of our history without calling me. He created this hiding place, this basement of memories. Another part of me, however, felt the opposite, guilty, because if he had to do it in secret, it's because at some point, he learned that I wasn't a safe place for those questions, and that hurt more than any accusation. "Did I do this to you?" I thought. looking around, as if the basement itself could answer me. Did I teach you to hide what you feel? To keep your doubts to yourself? To dig on your own, afraid of hurting me? The tension between these two forces, the feeling of betrayal and the deep guilt, began to suffocate me. I didn't know which one to run from. If I thought as a mother, I felt pain seeing my son tampering with such delicate pieces of our history without my presence. If I thought as a woman, as someone who had also been hurt, I silently understood his impulse, the need to know, to understand who he truly was, to piece together what perhaps I myself had taken apart. I wanted to be angry with him. I wanted for a second to justify my pain through his actions, to say, he had no right, he invaded what is mine, he dug where he shouldn't have. But when I imagined his face, tired, tense, worried, perhaps hurt, I felt the anger dissolve before it was even born. Because behind every sheet of paper there, behind every photo, behind every recent note, I didn't see malice. I saw need, the need for answers, the need for truth, a need to fill voids that I may have left behind. I ran my hands over my face, trying to wipe away the tears, but they kept coming back. I looked at one of the piles of documents and imagined my son there, sitting where I was now, night after night, rummaging through papers, reading, trying to understand, alone, with no one to guide him. As a mother, that tore me apart. As a woman, I was exposing myself. As a human being, I was burning up inside. Why is my own son hiding this from me? I repeated again, this time aloud, the sound faintly echoing off the walls, because it wasn't just a question about the documents, it was a question about our relationship, about what happened along the way between the boy who ran to my lap at the slightest problem and the man who preferred to go down to the basement alone to investigate his own mother's past. Maybe he was afraid of my reaction. Maybe he thought I would deny it, distort it, shut down. Maybe he had already tried to bring up the subject before, timidly, and I, without realizing it, had changed the subject, cut him off, run away. And now the result was there. A basement full of things that should have been conversations, hugs, outpourings, and not locked boxes. The worry also weighed on my chest in another way. What if what he found there was hurting him? What if, in trying to understand his own story, he was filling himself with resentments he should never carry? What if he had started to see me differently, as someone who deceived him, who lied, who hid things? The mere possibility of that made something inside me shatter. You don't know everything, my son, I thought, staring silently at the piles of papers. You weren't there when certain things happened. You don't know what I had to choose, what I had to endure, what I had to do to protect you, even if it seems the opposite today. I wanted to explain everything, every detail, every decision, every silence. I wanted to talk about the fear, the pressures, the threats, the sleepless nights, the choices that weren't as simple as right and wrong. I wanted to say that if I hid something, it wasn't out of contempt, but out of love. A twisted love, perhaps. A flawed love, perhaps. But still, love. My eyes scanned the room once more. It was as if the entire basement was a mirror of our relationship, full of important, true, intense things, but kept in a place where no one wanted to enter. Until one day, someone did. And now I was there, facing the reflection of everything I had avoided. Fear, because I didn't know how much he had already seen. Confusion, because I didn't know what he was thinking about me. Guilt, because maybe I helped all of this happen. It hurts because he chose. Silence, secrecy, the basement, instead of me. And behind all of this, a painful certainty. Nothing could erase the fact that my son was facing a part of our history alone. And I, who thought I had done everything to protect him, now saw that perhaps I had failed precisely where I most wanted to succeed. There, sitting in the cold of that basement, surrounded by evidence of a past I didn't want to revisit, I understood that that night wasn't just about what he was hiding. That was something I also hid. And about the abyss that silence has dug between us. Still seated in the chair, my eyes fixed on the relics in that small, hidden room in the basement, I felt time slipping away strangely, sometimes too fast, sometimes too slow. My chest still burned with confusion, with memories that rose like ghosts, with the weight of everything I had avoided for so many years. The papers before me seemed to pulsate with a life of their own, as if ready to tell stories I never had the courage to explain. I took a deep breath, trying to regain some composure. The silence was so dense I could hear the muffled sound of my own heart. Upstairs, the whole house seemed suspended, waiting for the next move. And it was precisely in that fragile interval that I heard a familiar sound, the turning of the key in the front door. My heart froze. It was him. The sound of the door opening echoed like distant, albeit soft, thunder, the click of the latch catching my attention in an almost physical way. My muscles tensed as if my whole body had understood before I did what was about to happen. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady as if they had forgotten how to function. The sound of his footsteps down the hallway followed soon after, measured, firm, hurried. It wasn't a relaxed or tired walk. It was a worried, perhaps irritated, perhaps anxious walk. The kind of walk you only recognize because you've heard it your whole life. I knew he was calling for me even before I heard his voice. "Mother?" My breath caught in my throat. The echo of the word traveled throughout the basement. He was close, very close. I glanced quickly around, as if there were a way to undo it all, to hide the papers, to erase any trace of my presence there. But it was too late. The broken padlock was still on the floor. The door was wide open. The dim light revealed everything. There was no turning back. "She can't be down there," I heard him murmur, almost to himself. The sound of footsteps grew faster. Suddenly, a strange feeling came over me, a mixture of shame and defiance, of fear and unexpected courage. I didn't know how to explain any of it to him, but I was no longer willing to run away. That's when his shadow appeared at the top of the stairs. He descended the first few steps slowly, as if he were walking on glass. The dim light from the basement illuminated his face as he approached, and I immediately saw the transformation in his gaze. First, surprise. Then, shock. Next, silent panic. And finally, the expression that broke me inside: deception. He stopped a few steps before the basement floor, as if he wasn't sure if he wanted to continue. "Mom, what are you doing here?" His voice was low, almost a whisper, but heavy with tension. He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. Each word seemed tied in a knot of emotions that I couldn't fully decipher. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. How can I explain that a part of me was dragged there by love? How can I explain the intuition, the fear, the noises, the smell, the padlock? How can I explain that I found, on that very ground, fragments of a life I tried to hide from him, to protect him? He went down the rest of the stairs. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the basement like hammer blows. When he reached the last step, he stopped. He stood there, breathing deeply, his gaze fixed precisely on the table, or rather, on what was on it. I watched him with a lump in my throat as his eyes scanned the open boxes, the scattered documents, the photos, the notes. He didn't need to ask how it all ended up there. He already knew. He knew I'd been rummaging through everything. He knew I'd discovered the secret. His eyes slowly rose, meeting mine. It was one of the harshest stares I've ever received in my life. There was no hatred. There was no aggression. But there was fear. And there was pain. And there was a silent question that burned more than any spoken word. "Why did you come here?" For a few seconds, we stood there just looking at each other. A silence so thick it felt like a wall between us. I saw his jaw muscles clench, saw his chest rise and fall unevenly. He was vulnerable, perhaps for the first time since he became an adult, and his vulnerability hit me like a blow. "You shouldn't be here," he said finally, his voice faltering at the end of the sentence. Something about that sentence pierced me like a knife, not because of the tone, but because of what it meant. He wasn't just saying I'd invaded his space. He was saying I'd crossed an emotional boundary that he himself didn't know how to handle. "Son," I tried to speak, but my voice broke. I heard noises. I got worried. The children spoke. He closed his eyes tightly for a second, as if trying to absorb everything. Then he opened them slowly, his gaze shining with contained emotion. "You don't understand," he said, moving closer to me. I was trying to solve this on my own. I was trying to protect you." The phrase hit me like a physical blow. Protect you? Me, who spent my life trying to protect him? Me, who hid so many things because I thought it was for his best. So now he was the one hiding to protect me? My heart tightened. My eyes filled with tears again. The confusion within me mingled with deep sorrow, and, at the same time, with silent gratitude. It was a whirlwind impossible to name. "My son, why didn't you tell me?" My voice sounded small and shaky. He looked away, unable to fully meet my gaze at that moment. "Because I didn't know how you would react," he replied, "and because I didn't want to hurt you." The room seemed to spin for a second. My chest burned with an old pain, resurrected in that instant. But it wasn't all pain. It was love. It was fear. It was a loss. It was a reunion. It was all mixed up. He took another step, now very close to me, and it was there, in that moment, with the entire basement illuminating our secrets, his and mine, that I understood that the secret wasn't just in the boxes. The secret was between the two of us. And he knew it. I knew. And we knew, from that troubled look in his eyes, that nothing would be the same after that night. The secret was out, but what would come next? There was still a chasm between us. He stood there, right in front of me, breathing deeply as if needing to carefully choose each word he would say next. The basement, with its dim light and heavy air, seemed to have transformed into a kind of silent courtroom. No judge, no lawyer, just two people who loved each other and, at the same time, no longer knew exactly how to approach one another. He ran a hand through his hair nervously, like he did as a child when he had to confess to some mischief. But now he was no longer a boy trying to admit he broke a vase. He was a man, carrying the weight of an enormous secret that, somehow, involved my entire life. "I didn't want it to be like this, Mom," he began, his voice low and hoarse. "I wish I'd had the courage to speak up sooner. But the more I discovered, the less I knew where to begin." My chest tightened. I was discovering... What? I asked, even though deep down I already felt I knew where the answer was. He looked at the table, at the documents, at the scattered photos. He picked up one of the papers, an old yellowed envelope. He carefully turned it between his fingers, as if he were holding a piece of thin glass. "You always told me my father died in an accident," he said without looking at me. "When I was little, you didn't talk much. When I grew up, you talked even less. I never really questioned it, Mom. I just accepted it, because I saw the pain in your eyes when the subject came up. And I didn't want to hurt you." Each word was a silent blow. I knew this moment could come someday. I had only prayed that it never would. "A few months ago," he continued, "I received a call from an unknown number, a man saying he had things to tell me about my father, about our family's past." I closed my eyes for a second, feeling my whole body go cold. I knew exactly which past he was talking about, a part of my history that I had buried alive, trying to convince myself that it would never resurface. "I hung up right away," he said. "I thought it was a scam, someone wanting money, but the man called again and sent a message. He knew my father's full name. He knew where you lived. He knew where I was born. He knew too much for it to be a coincidence. He placed the, envelope on the table, right in the center, as if it were evidence in an unlikely courtroom. I tried to ignore it," he continued, "but it wouldn't leave my head. Then one day I responded. I asked him what he wanted, and that's when it all began. My heart felt like it was trapped in an invisible hand that squeezed it mercilessly. "The man said my father didn't die in that accident," he said, finally looking up at me. "He said you ran away, that you disappeared, that you took a child with you, and never looked back." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. I swallowed hard. "What else did he say?" I whispered. He took another deep breath, as if he had to dig for courage from within his own soul. I told her that my father wasn't the man I imagined, that he had a police record, that he had a history of violence, that you weren't a widow, mother. You were a survivor trying to start over. My eyes filled with tears instantly. I didn't need to confirm anything. He already understood. He already saw. He already read. The documents were there, the records, the old complaints, the letters, the clippings, everything. "I didn't tell you everything, son," I said, my voice faltering, "not because I wanted to lie, but because I thought you would be safer not knowing. I was afraid of turning your life into a continuation of my pain." He gave a sad, small, joyless smile. "I know that now," he replied. "But when I started investigating, I didn't know anything. I just felt like there was a hole in my story, and that hole started to hurt." He pulled out another folder, opened it, and revealed copies of official documents, police reports, and statements. Some had my name on them. Some had his father's name on them. Some had details that I myself had tried to erase from my memory. "I went looking for everything, Mom," he confessed. "Old records, the houses you lived in, the dates. I found out you registered his death long after he left. I found out there were complaints against him. I found out there were neighbors who remembered shouting, arguments, police at the door. I found out you didn't leave home just because of an accident. You left to save yourself, and to save me." A tear rolled down my face silently. A part of me cringed with shame, not because of the facts themselves, but because he had discovered them through other means, because he hadn't heard it from me, because I hadn't been able to hold his hand while he told me. Another part, however, felt a kind of bittersweet relief. Someone had finally seen the burden I had carried alone for so many years. "I didn't want you to find out about him like this," I murmured. "You were just a baby. I thought the best thing I could do was let you grow up without that shadow, without that fear, without knowing who he really was," he finished, without irony, only with sadness. I didn't respond. There was no perfect defense. All that existed was a painful truth. I did what I thought was right, and yet, that generated another kind of pain. "And then I found out something else," he continued, his voice becoming a little more tense. "The man who called me wasn't just anyone. He was a retired investigator. He worked on one of the cases where my father's name came up. And he said that, lately, someone has been asking about you, about your name, about where you lived, about your relatives." My blood ran cold. "Is someone looking for me?" I asked, feeling fear churn in my stomach. He nodded seriously. "Yes, and he's not a good person, Mom. He said that in this kind of thing, some people don't forget, especially when they think they lost something because of someone. It could be revenge. It could be money. It could be hate. He said it was impossible to know, but when he realized his name had started circulating again after so many years, he got worried, and that's why he decided to contact me." I felt my legs trembling. I rested one hand on the table, the other on my chest, as if that could contain the impact of it all. "That's when I bought the padlock," he confessed, looking around. "That's when I started storing everything down here. I didn't want you to see. Not yet. I needed to gather everything, understand it, assess the risk. I started talking to a lawyer. I thought about taking you to the notary, changing some records. I even thought about looking into protection options, in case someone really decided to contact you with bad intentions." He took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment. "I was trying to protect you, Mom," he repeated more firmly. "Just like you tried to protect me back then. The difference is, you did it silently. I did it in secret." The pieces started to fall into place in my mind. His absences, his tired expression, the worried look I noticed from time to time, which I attributed solely to work, the mysterious phone calls, his restless, distracted manner. None of it had to do with just tiredness. He wasn't just living his life. He was carrying my story. "I was afraid to tell you all this and see you fall apart," he admitted. "Afraid of reigniting old pains. Afraid you would blame yourself for things that weren't your fault. Afraid you would look at me and think you failed as a mother. So I did what I thought was best for now. I left you in peace up there, while I faced everything down here." His eyes filled with tears, but he tried to hold them back. "But now, you've gone down," he said, with a sad half-smile. "And I think I can't keep you away from this anymore, can I?" I remained silent for a few seconds, feeling the weight of it all. The past, the present, the choices, the consequences. My son, that boy I once rescued from a house filled with screams, was now the man trying, in his own way, to defend me from the echoes of that same house. He wasn't my enemy. He wasn't my accuser. He was the result of everything I had lived through, of everything I had hidden, of everything I had tried to protect, and also of everything I couldn't prevent. My son, I approached him, gently touching his face. "You don't have to carry this burden alone. Not yesterday, not today. If there's anyone who needs to face this past, it's me. And if there's anyone I didn't want to lose in the middle of all this, it's you." He held my hand, squeezing it tightly, and in that small gesture, the truth became even clearer. The basement, with all those papers, wasn't just a place of fear. It was a place of twisted love. Protection failed, from desperate attempts, about a mother who one day ran away to save her son, and of a son who was now hiding to try and save his mother. The turning point that night wasn't just discovering the documents. It was a revelation that, behind all those secrets, we were both trying to do the same thing all along, taking care of each other, even without knowing how. After the revelation, after the confessions, after so many truths thrown onto the basement table like shards of glass, the silence that fell between us was almost unbearable. Not an empty silence, but a full silence, full of everything we didn't know how to say, full of everything that was never spoken, full of all the wounds opened that night. My son and I stared at each other for long seconds, maybe minutes. Time inside seemed to have disconnected from the real world. The dim lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, shadows that seemed to reflect the instability within. Us. And it was there, in that fragile moment, that I realized there wasn't just one possible path. What would come next depended not only on the revealed truth, but on how each of us would be able to deal with it. Then here they open two possible outcomes, two distinct paths, paths that completely change how the story concludes. I took a deep breath, trying to find within myself the strength I had needed so many times in the past. But now the strength was different. It wasn't for running away. It wasn't for hiding. It was for staying, for facing it, for embracing it. My son, standing before me, seemed smaller than ever. Not physically. He was a grown man, taller than me, stronger than me. But emotionally, at that moment, he seemed as vulnerable as when he was a child. And I saw it in his eyes. A look that said, I tried. Even though I failed. Even though I got hurt. He was the first to break the silence. Mom, I'm sorry. His voice cracked. I should have trusted you. I should have spoken up. I should have involved you in this from the beginning. I was just afraid. Afraid of losing you. Afraid of hurting you. Afraid of discovering something that would make me see you differently. I felt my heart tighten, but in a good way, like feeling a wound being washed after being infected for a long time. Son, I was afraid too. I spent my whole life afraid that the past would hurt you, afraid of seeing you suffer for things that weren't your fault, afraid that you would judge me, afraid of shattering your childhood, your image, your world. He took a step closer. I don't want to lose you, Mom. And I realized that was exactly what was at stake. Family, bonding, love, and then with tears streaming down my face uncontrollably, I took the final step that was missing between us. I held his face in my hands and said, You never lost me, and you never will. No matter how much pain there is in our history, we are still a family, and families can heal. He hugged me, a long, strong, desperate hug. A hug I'd known since before he learned to walk. A hug that, in that instant, stitched together the torn parts between us. In that basement, among sad memories, somber documents, and photos bearing scars, something new was born, a silent promise of a new beginning. In the days that followed, we talked about everything. We pieced the story together piece by piece. We laughed at what hurt less. We cried at what hurt more. And, little by little, the truth that had once seemed like a monster became just history, the past. And the new phase began there. Not perfect, not without scars, but it's real, and above all, together. After the revelation, I couldn't breathe properly. It wasn't from surprise. It wasn't from shock. It was from something much deeper. The realization that my story, my pain, was being relived without my consent. That my son, even with good intentions, had placed me before a mirror I never asked to see again. He looked at me, waiting for an answer. Mom, are you okay? I wanted to say yes. I wanted to calm him down. I wanted to hug him and end the anguish on his face. But I wasn't feeling well, not even close. The truth had a weight I wasn't ready to carry again. That night had awakened wounds I'd spent decades trying to heal. The feeling of reliving it all, of seeing documents I myself never had the courage to look at again, of realizing my son had plunged alone into that emotional hell. It broke me in a way that was too profound. Why did you do this alone? I asked, my voice trembling. He tried to explain, but I could tell from his demeanor that nothing he said would undo what had already been done. It wasn't a lack of love. It wasn't ingratitude. Era limit. My limit. The invisible line between what I could bear and what I could no longer bear. Son, I understand your intentions, I said, finally finding the words. But the way you did it, it affected me in a way I can't describe. He took a step towards me. Mom, I didn't mean to hurt you. But it hurt, I replied, without raising my voice. Not because you wanted to, but because you opened doors within me that I've spent my whole life trying to keep closed. I saw the pain in his face, and it broke my heart. But for the first time in many years, I chose something I had been slow to learn, to choose myself. I need time, I said. I need to breathe. I need to get out of this place, get out of this story, get out of this forced reconstruction. He stood motionless. Silence filled the basement once more. I touched his arm gently. I love you, my son, but loving doesn't mean destroying myself to be by your side. I need to step away for a while. I need to find my own pieces before trying to fit them back together with yours. A tear rolled down his face, silently. "Are you coming back?" he asked. I hesitated, and in that hesitation lay the truth. "When I'm ready," I replied. I climbed the stairs slowly, feeling each step, as a weight being lifted from my shoulders and at the same time, a grief settling in my chest. It wasn't an escape, it wasn't punishment, it was emotional survival. Sometimes the truth unites, but sometimes the truth leaves such a deep mark that only distance can prevent the wound from becoming infected. And that night, I chose the only path that seemed possible, to save myself, even if it meant for a while being away from him. When I finally climbed the basement stairs, whether in the culmination of reconciliation or the necessary break, I felt as if each step was a piece of my life being put back in its place, not in the old way, not in the way I thought was safe, but in the way that truth demands. Firm, direct, inevitable. The air in the house seemed different when I returned to the upper floor, lighter in some corners, heavier in others, but, for the first time in a long time, real. Because there's something no one teaches us when we're young, when we're raising children, when we're trying to keep our whole lives running on willpower alone. Secrets don't disappear. They wait, sometimes for years, sometimes for decades. And the more silence we create around them, the bigger they become. The greater the fear, the greater the distance. The feeling grows stronger that if we talk, everything will fall apart. But the truth is different. Secrets grow in silence, not because they are monstrous, but because we allow them to become so. And that night, watching my son piece together a story I had tried to bury to protect him, I understood something that had taken me a lifetime to mature within myself. Silence protects for a while, but it hurts forever. I thought I was taking care of him. I thought I was shielding his heart. I thought that hiding the ugly part would mean giving him the chance to grow light, clean, and intact. But, without realizing it, I also planted seeds of doubt. I planted holes. I planted shadows where there should have been dialogue. And shadows, I learned, have a terrible talent. They always find a way to spread. As I walked around the room, taking a deep breath, I felt different. No longer the woman who ran away in the past. No longer the mother who tried to survive alone. No longer the person who believed that hiding was the only way to protect. I had crossed the basement, both outside and inside, and a journey like that changes anyone. I realized that, even in the most painful versions of this story, I grew. I grew as a mother because I understood that love without truth can become a prison. I grew as a woman because I recognized that I no longer need to hide from old memories to continue living. I grew as a human being because I finally accepted that we only confront what we dare to look in the eye. The basement, which had previously seemed like just a dark and forgotten place, had become a symbol, a mirror of what we try to hide even from ourselves. And now, after so long, I had finally turned on the light in there. If in the end I chose to embrace my son, rebuild, talk, open everything up, or if I chose to step away, breathe, compose myself, protect my emotional health, one thing was certain. For the first time, I was making a conscious choice. It wasn't fear anymore. It was no longer an escape. It was no longer silent. Era conscience, era wisdom, era strength. That strength that comes not from struggle, but from acceptance. And then I understood the greatest lesson of that night. Sometimes, what we hide to protect those we love is precisely what hurts them. And what we show may hurt at first, but it heals in the end. It took me a lifetime to learn this, and it may still take some time to implement everything as it should be done. But now I know I don't want to live behind locked doors anymore. Neither emotional nor physical. Neither mine nor my son's. The truth, however harsh it may be, always finds a way to climb the stairs. And when she arrives, we only have two choices. Lock her up again, or make room for her to sit next to us and finally stop chasing us. I chose to open it. And you? If I were in that basement, standing before a locked door, a new padlock, and hearing noises in the dark, would you go down to discover the truth, or would you wait for it to come up to you? If this story has captivated you this far, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps me continue bringing you profound stories full of lessons. And tell me in the comments, would you go down into the basement, or would you wait to find out the truth?